Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns and welcome once again to another edition of Sound Off Louisiana, and I'm going to try to keep this video as brief as possible. The purpose of today's Sound Off is to give our full throttled endorsement to Governor Jeff Landry's Constitutional Amendment 2, which will be on your ballot on March the 29th of this year, only a couple of weeks away. In fact, it's 2 weeks from the day I'm filming this, which is March the 15th of 2025. Now, I'm going to briefly hit what this amendment does, because as has been pointed out in media outlets, it's a fairly complicated deal, but I'm going to hit the real high points here and the reasons that I'm throwing full throttled support behind this amendment, very similarly to the way that I did with regard to Governor Landry's tax proposals, tax reform that went through in that last special session in November. Okay, first of all, what the amendment would do is it would reduce the maximum tax rate that can be imposed on our citizens from 4.75% to 3.75%. It would put it in the Constitution. I think that is absolutely critical because Louisiana has got to gradually phase out the income tax on individuals if we have any hope of becoming competitive with our neighboring state of Texas, to whom we've lost population for quite some time now. Nobody even disputes that, and this is an important initiative in that regard. Now, it is true that presently Louisiana's top income tax rate is 3%, which is less than the 3.75 that would be in the Constitution, and we have Governor Landry to thank for that. But I think it is critical that we remove the ability to jack it back up to as high as 4.75%, which is where it could go if the legislature was so inclined. And I think to demonstrate that we are absolutely committed to getting rid of the personal income taxes in Louisiana, we should, if this constitutional amendment did not have anything else in it, that alone, from my vantage point, and those are many that I've spoken with, would justify passage of this amendment. Lowering the maximum they can possibly jack the personal income tax rate back up to 3.75%. All right, second major feature of the amendment is it would increase the standard deduction for all senior citizens from $12,500 to $25,000. That is a major break for the senior citizens of this state. And I know what some of you are going to say is that, well, you're getting awfully close, aren't you? You're no spring chicken. And in the interest of full disclosure, yes, I am getting close. I will be 62 in September. So yes, I am getting close. So naturally, yes, I do have a vested interest in that aspect passing, but so does every other senior citizen in this state, of which I'm not there yet. But that would become effective in 2026. I think that is a major break that is needed for the senior population of this state. And I would also point out very briefly that when I file my state income taxes, I can't take anything. I mean, I have to go through on TurboTax. For those of you who are familiar with it, I have to say no on the priority 1, no on the priority 2, no on the priority 3, no on the priority 4 credits. And that's one of the big problems we have with the income tax system in Louisiana. Over the years, there have been so many exemptions created that those of us we're in the minority that just simply go in there and have to pay through the nose. But at any rate, I didn't want anybody to say, well, it's true. I would have a vested interest in that, in the interest of full disclosure. We're going to get to some of the opposition and speak briefly on that near the end of this video. The amendment would also fund a $2,000 teacher pay raise, along with a $1,000 a year raise for support workers. It's important to note how that's being done, and I don't want to get way down in the weeds because I've already been accused of doing that too much, especially on that last feature for the State Police Commission, or feature before last that I had to come in and do the Cliff Notes version on. But in a nutshell, there are some existing funds that have a balance of $2 billion, educational funds. Those funds would be liquidated. And the proceeds of them would be used to pay down the accrued liability on, I know I'm going to get a little in the weeds, of the teacher retirement system, and paying down $2 billion would save an enormous amount in interest, and that's the money that would be used to fund the $2,000 pay raise. Now, opponents have argued that it is no raise because we've been getting the $2,000 every year for the last few years, but here's the important thing. It's subject to the whim of the legislature. And if times become tough, it's not enshrined that you're going to get that $2,000. Passing this would mean you're going to get that $2,000. Hence, Julie Emerson, she's state representative from Karen Crow, her use of the word permanent is completely applicable in the matter, okay? She's been criticized for that, I think unjustly. So that's the third element. Let me just say this. Whenever something like this comes up, it's inevitable that there's going to be litigation, I guess. We are the most sue-happy state I know of. So there's been litigation. You may have seen it that has been filed. It's filed by a gentleman named William Most, who is an attorney in New Orleans. And Attorney General Liz Muriel has referred to this litigation, and I quote her on this, as being frivolous. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I agree with her that this is frivolous litigation. She is asking the Supreme Court to intervene and go ahead and toss this suit out. I hope that happens. It probably won't, in my opinion, but I believe that it should, and I believe she is correct that this lawsuit should be tossed out, and I'm going to tell you why. We can all stipulate to the fact that the turnout for this election is going to be very low, okay? You don't have some dynamic personality on the ballot. It'll probably be a little bit higher in St. George because they have a mayoral election on the ballot. But by and large, this is going to be an extremely low turnout election. That being the case, people that go out to vote on nothing more than constitutional amendments, typically they've done their homework, okay? And I'm going to do something that I don't do often. I'm going to compliment the advocate, and we're going to provide a link for a highly detailed feature that they did on all four of these amendments. That's enabling you to do your homework, much of which I'm covering. At least I'm covering the positive aspects. We'll touch on the negative or the opposition in just a moment with regard to Constitutional Amendment 2. But what Mr. Most is basically saying is that, well, they condensed it down to one sentence, and it is an enormous amount of material. I haven't covered all the material, but I don't want to get too in the weeds on this. And they condensed it down to one sentence, and he says it falsely portrays the positives without relaying any of the negatives. My counter argument to that is exactly what I just said. He's wanting to treat us like we're school children and we're going in to take an exam and we haven't studied at all, okay? We just go in there and, okay, the teacher puts it on there. Oh, well, I don't know the answer. I'll guess and hope I do the best. That is not indicative of the type of diligence that will have been done by voters who vote in this election, okay? They will have studied it just like you would study for an exam, okay? So I think it is disingenuous and quite frankly insulting to voters to say that we don't have the ability to do our homework and make up our minds. And I don't need to read the language. I know how I'm going to vote. I don't need to read their little synopsis, okay? And I think that's going to be true of 99.5% of the voters who enter that voting box. So I think the argument about the language on the ballot is of no consequence. That's my opinion. It may have been significant 30 or 40 years ago when we didn't have the kind of technology we've got now, when we didn't have the ability to go in and look at the article like I'm going to give you from the advocate. But we're living in a different age now, and the voters will be very well prepared as they walk into that voting booth. So I don't know. I find that argument disingenuous. I find it insulting, quite frankly, and I hope, I would love for the Supreme Court to intervene and throw it out, but I don't think that's going to happen. Liz Muriel was critical of the judge. She said she got it wrong. I'm hesitant to go that far because I attended the court hearing, and I don't know. It's just very frustrating that litigation was even filed on this. But that, as I said, that's the type. It's the type environment that we operate in. All right, I want to go to the opposition for just a moment, and I am going to do like I did in the last feature and get up close. We'll provide a link for this, but I want to get up close by the camera so you can see where the opposition is coming from. But let me just say this. This is incredible because you have William Most, who basically is a front man for the far left, okay, about as left as you can get, George Soros type funding to file these lawsuits. And ironically, he's paired with arch rival conservatives like the Reverend Tony Spell along with Woody Jenkins. So it's quite a interesting pair-up that has happened here, and I even mentioned that to William Most prior, because I'm familiar with Mr. Most. I won't go into the details, but he knows me, I know him, and we talked before the court hearing this past week. But I did tell him, I said, boy, who would have ever thought that anything like this would happen? And of course he said, hey, well, if you agree, then what difference does it make what your political philosophies in life are? But I'm gonna say something here. And I'm going to quote him, okay? I'm going to quote Reverend Spell because I think I find it interesting. What they are objecting to is that this amendment would remove the constitutional protection that is afforded to church properties, okay? When I say church properties, I'm talking about a sanctuary. It would still require a 2/3 vote for that property tax exemption to be removed. And I can just tell you right now that any legislature, particularly one conservative, is a dead duck if he or she did that, okay? They will never be reelected. It's just that simple. You're not going to remove the lack of taxability on the property tax of a house of worship. It's not going to happen, okay? But they don't like the fact that you better not even diminish us by taking it out of the Constitution. But I want to quote Reverend Spell, and it's going to be in that article that we're providing the link for. I want to quote him verbatim. It says, Spell believes that churches are in danger of losing their property tax exemptions someday. He added that some religious organizations own rental housing with many units, for example. And then here's the key quote, that's why I'm concerned about this, because I own some of those properties. Verbatim quote. Let me tell you something. If you've got a church that owns an apartment complex and that complex is exempt from taxation, that is not, I hate to use the words of Chester Cedars, but that is not a level playing field with those who own rental property and are having to pay those taxes, okay? And there's no reason that it should be, okay? But he doesn't like it, all right? And think about this. And these churches, in the old days, churches were small and, they weren't, they were good people, but they didn't have the kind of enormous wealth. Everybody knows who it is. We got a preacher here in Louisiana that says he got to have a $60 million airplane, and that if Jesus were here, he would insist the same, okay? We're talking about an enormous amount of wealth for these religious organizations, okay? So My point being that there is no reason that a church that owns rental properties should be allowed to have tax-exempt status and not have to pay property taxes on those rental properties that have nothing to do with the worship services, okay? Many of you know I live in an apartment complex. That is unfair, in my opinion, to Mike Wampo to have to go up against competitors who would have tax exemption. So a church buys an apartment complex, they can then put members of their own congregation in there close by the church and offer rent that is lower than someone who is having to pay the property taxes. So I believe that that is just an unfair, and I will give Spell credit. He did at least say why he's opposed to Constitutional Amendment 2, but I would note the highly vested interest he has in that regard. So that's going to wrap it up for Constitutional Amendment 2. I'm just going to let you know very briefly, we are voting for all 4 of the constitutional amendments. I'll just state very briefly, one of them would create specialized courts. I think we need that because right now all the judges are a be-all, do-all, and sometimes they may not get a case similar to what they had before for another 4 years. And it's tough to have the technical knowledge to handle those type matters. So I support that one, or we support that one. Likewise, the one that would give the legislature the ability to expand and cause juveniles to be treated as adults. Look, the reality is we've got 15 and 16-year-olds that are out there running around, and they are committing what in the old days would have been unheard of for those 15 and 16-year-olds. If you're going to do this, then my stand is that a little time in Angola may help cure that. Now, the opponents say that, well, it increases the suicide rate and causes repeat offenses. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. All I know is, once again, the organization, I didn't even mention, there was a lawsuit filed on that this past week. And the funding for that is coming from the Melinda Gates Foundation. So we have to spend more taxpayer money having to fend off these lawsuits. So I'm closing it out because I don't like to make these too long. I hope you will join with me in voting for all 4 of the constitutional amendments that will appear on your ballot on March the 29th. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you on another Sound Off Louisiana feature very soon. Thank you once again.